the questions remain. The mind-bending drugs seem to offer so much, but what do they really deliver?
LSD. It starts with a lab accident, sparks a cultural revolution, and then gets buried by the government.
Now it's making a comeback. It's re-emerging under the intense lens of modern science as, maybe, a key to understanding consciousness itself.
So I want you to just think about this for a second. This isn't just a hypothetical. What if a single discovery, one that could potentially unlock the secrets of our own minds and totally change psychiatry, wasn't just found, but was legally researched for decades, only to be systematically scrubbed from the history books? Well, that's not a what if. That's the real story we're getting into today.
All right, so let's set the stage. Our story begins in a pretty surprising place. A 30-year window where all of this research was perfectly legal and, frankly, often groundbreaking. We're talking from 1938 all the way to 1968.
Okay, so it all starts simply enough. You've got this chemist, Albert Hofmann, back in 1938. He creates a new compound, LSD-25, hoping for some kind of medical use. Nothing. So he just shelves it. But 5 years later, a tiny accidental exposure blows the doors wide open, leading to the first intentional trip, which we now call Bicycle Day. By the 1950s, this stuff is seen as a really promising tool in psychiatry. But then, the 60s happened. And its connection to the counterculture put it on a direct collision course with politics.
Yeah, and you really have to listen to Hoffman's own words about that first time. He didn't describe it as chaos. He said it was an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, a kaleidoscopic play of colors. It's almost like he was the first person to get a look at the brain's own graphics card running at full tilt. But that experience wasn't just poetry, was it? There's some real hard science going on underneath all of that.
That's exactly right. That profound experience has a very clear chemical reason for happening. LSD fits into our brain's serotonin receptors, specifically the 5-HT2A receptor, like a master key in a very specific lock. Now, that low K value you see here, all that means is it's a perfect fit. It binds incredibly tight and holds on, and that's why the effects are so powerful and last so long. This isn't magic, it's just incredibly precise neurochemistry.
And that precision, that very effectiveness, brings us to the core reason this whole first act ends the way it does. The research wasn't shut down because the molecule didn't work, or because it was dangerous in a lab. The data showed the complete opposite. No, it was banned because its effects, the questioning of authority, the dissolving of rigid egos, that became politically inconvenient. It worked, all right? It just worked a little too well on a generation that the establishment really wanted to keep under control. And that right there brings us to Act 2. Let's call it the Great Suppression. This is a 50-year winter for science, where this incredibly promising research wasn't just frowned upon, it was actively made illegal. So how do you take a promising psychiatric tool and turn it into public enemy number one? Well, it happens with a really powerful idea. If you can demonize a certain state of mind, you can control the people who are looking for it. The goal was to shrink the very definition of what was considered an acceptable way to be conscious. And the main weapon they used to achieve that goal was a very real, very documented government program. Project MKUltra was literally the CIA's attempt to weaponize these substances, and they did it through secret operations that included illegal experiments on their own unsuspecting citizens. And right here, you can see the strategy laid bare. On one side, you've got the myth. The public was fed a constant stream of horror stories about bad trips and people going insane. But then you look at the source. Declassified documents show programs like Operation Midnight Climax, where the CIA itself was secretly dosing people who had no idea what was happening. They were literally manufacturing the evidence they needed to justify banning it. And the results of all that manufactured fear was this. The official classification in 1970. LSD became a Schedule I drug. Now, that category is reserved for substances with absolutely no medical value and a high potential for abuse. This one decision effectively slammed the brakes on all legitimate scientific research for nearly half a century. But here's the absolute glaring contradiction. This scientific reality, something that was known then and has been confirmed over and over again since, is that LSD is non-addictive, and physiologically it's one of the safest drugs known. There has never been a single documented case of a fatal overdose in a human being. So that classification, it was a political move, not a scientific one, period. And that's the real takeaway from this whole dark age.
Decades of incredibly promising research into treating alcoholism, anxiety, and even just understanding consciousness itself were thrown in the trash. And why? To protect a power structure that saw the very idea of ego dissolution, of people questioning who they are and their place in the world, as a genuine threat to national security. But that's not where the story ends. Not even close. Now we enter Act 3, the awakening. This is the era we're living in right now, where all of this suppressed knowledge is finally coming back out of the shadows. See, the potential of these states of mind, it wasn't destroyed. It couldn't be. It was just forced to go underground. You could say it went into this long, 50-year incubation, just waiting for the right tools and the right ideas to mature so it could come back. And one of the most exciting new ways of thinking about this comes from groups like the Qualia Research Institute, or QRI. They've got this idea called the heavy-tailed valence hypothesis. Okay, that sounds complicated, but valence is just how good or bad an experience feels. Their theory is that our normal day-to-day range of pleasure and pain is just a tiny little sliver of what's actually possible. And they argue that psychedelic states can give us access to the really extreme ends of that emotional spectrum.
And the key thing to understand here is that this is not some abstract philosophical hand-waving. This is a serious, rigorous attempt to build a real science of the mind. The core idea is simple but pretty radical. Consciousness isn't just some illusion. It's a real, physical thing that follows precise mathematical laws, just like gravity or electromagnetism. Their ultimate goal is to actually map it out.
So what does that actually mean for you and me? Well, it flips our whole understanding of the brain upside down. The old model was that our brain sees the world and then it tries to predict what will happen next. QRI is saying, no, that's backwards. The brain first creates a complete, conscious simulation of the world, literally what you're experiencing right now. And then it uses that simulation to make predictions. So in that model, psychedelics don't break your brain, they just give you a peek behind the curtain at the source code of your own reality. And that brings us to right now. With mental health crises getting worse, depression, addiction, anxiety, understanding these states of consciousness is no longer some kind of countercultural luxury. It has become a critical, clinical, and even philosophical necessity for our future. Okay, so let's try to wrap all of this up. Let's make a closing argument, offer a new perspective on this whole tangled story. For half a century, we were sold a story. We were told that your mind was like private property, but it came with a government-mandated ceiling. We were taught to be afraid of the very tools that might let us step outside of the standard user interface of our own evolution. But the data doesn't lie. They weren't just dropping out. They were tuning into a frequency of empathy that was a direct threat to a system that thrives on division and control. Today, as we stand here in the middle of this second psychedelic renaissance, armed with so much better science and a much deeper understanding, the question is no longer whether these substances are dangerous. The real question, the one that we're left with, is this. After 50 years of being told to go to sleep, why are we still so afraid of what might happen when we finally wake up?